This week, the state's most powerful business group, Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, listed its priorities for the 2015-2016 session of the legislature. That session convenes January 5 to talk about WMC's goals, thanks to Scott Manley, WMC's Vice President for Government Relations and its Chief Lobbyist. Scott, welcome back to Wisconsin Eye.
Well, thanks for having me again, Steve.
Well, it looks to me like in the letter that the WMC President Kurt Bauer posted, right to work, is it fair to say right to work law is the top priority of WMC this session, Scott?
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think that's because it's an issue that our members strongly support, and it's an issue that we believe if Wisconsin is to remain economically competitive and build on the success that we've already had and continue to attract jobs and investment in economic expansion, we've got to become a right-to-work state.
Those of us who covered the candidates leading up to the fall election on November 4, we were surprised that right to work came right out of the box with Speaker Fitzgerald saying he hopes to debate it early. What did those journalists like us who covered the fall campaigns miss? It wasn't a central issue in the race for governor or in many races for the ledge. What did we miss?
Well, I think it's an issue that the business community has supported for a long time, and I think it's an issue that a lot of legislators have been passionate about for a long time, but we've never really had the political stars in alignment to get it done, and I think we do right now.
When the governor says, though, that would be a distraction as he molds and puts together his next state budget, is he being a little disingenuous? Because this is a governor who in 1993, as a first-term member of the Assembly, introduced a right-to-work law.
I don't think he's being disingenuous. I think he has a very specific set of priorities that he wants to get done, and he wants to focus on those. From our perspective, we can't afford to not do right to work. I mean, we look at right to work states, we're seeing better job growth than forced union states. We're seeing better wage growth than forced union states. And one thing that I think is kind of an untold story that's critically important to Wisconsin is we're seeing net migration positively flowing to right to work states. That's a big deal for our state because, like many others, we have a huge demographic problem in our workforce right now because we've got baby boomers retiring at a pace that's faster than we have replacement workers in the pipeline to fill those jobs. We need to enact the kind of policies that draw people and workers to our state, and right to work does that.
You've heard the reaction from Senator Hansen, Senator Schilling, Representative Peter Barca, all Democrats, and they say this is, quoting them, not me, an attack on the middle class. How do you respond?
Well, that's just not the case. I mean, the numbers are very clear. You've got higher wage growth in right to work states. You have better job growth, faster job growth. You've got more disposable income in right to work states when you factor in cost of living. And I don't think any of those are bad for the middle class. In fact, I think they're great for the middle class. The other thing is that what you find in right to work states is you have a higher manufacturing output than you do in other states. And I think it's because you tend to attract more manufacturing jobs. That's a critical piece because manufacturing jobs typically pay 30% more than the average wage. And so these are well-paying, family-supporting jobs for the middle class, and that have been available, for example, in Wisconsin, as a great middle-class career, regardless of education attainment level.
Well, and it intrigues me because right-to-work states, two industrialized states, Michigan and Indiana, and you know that Wisconsin ranks second only to Indiana in terms of number of manufacturing jobs. What has happened in those two states, Michigan and Indiana, when they've adopted right-to-work? Or is it too recent to see any trends, Scott?
Well, it's pretty early for Michigan in particular because they've only had about a year and a half. Indiana's had about a year more than that. Indiana's job pipeline or prospect pipeline doubled after right to work was passed, and they've been able to attract some pretty significant projects and bring thousands of new employees to their state. And the site selectors told them, as they're telling folks in Michigan, you're back on the list. We have site selectors say that 75% of their clients won't even look at a state that isn't right to work, and that many states don't even realize that they had been reviewed and vetted as a place for possible expansion, but got scratched off the list before they even approached state and local economic development managers. So I think it's really important, and the experience in those states has shown that they have more economic opportunities knocking on their door now as opposed to before.
So it sends a symbolic message, to use the old trite phrase, that Wisconsin is open for business, even more open for business if we adopt a right to work law?
Yeah, it absolutely sends that signal, and it's I think for a lot of businesses they equate states that have a right to work law with, in terms of being a state that wants to invite business to be there and is a strong place to do business.
Just one final question on this issue. Yesterday I had a conversation with outgoing Democratic Senator Bob Jauch, and said that this could trigger large protests like we did in 2011. Do you see that happening again, the debate over a potential right-to-work law in Wisconsin?
Well, certainly there's going to be pushback from organized labor unions. That's happened in other states. They didn't have that kind of protest in Indiana and Michigan. They had protests, but it wasn't like Act 10, and I don't think this would be like Act 10 either, because the reason that the protests turned into what they did, and which was ultimately an occupation of our Capitol building, was because the Democrats in the Senate ran down to Illinois for a month. And they were able to do that because Act 10 was a fiscal bill. Right to work isn't a fiscal bill. Right to work is just a bill that says employees would be given the right to choose whether or not they want to belong to a union and pay dues without being fired for making that choice.
Is there any doubt in your mind that with the Assembly GOP controls 63-36 and the Senate 19-14 that this will become law next year?
I think it will. I think the support is there. The support's certainly there among the public. We've done our own polling, and we've found strong bipartisan support within our own state. Gallup did a poll over the summer in August. They found about 80% support for right to work, just the concept of employees should be given free choice in the workplace. And then when they asked the question, would you personally vote for right to work if you had a chance to do so, it was over 70% who said, yes, I would. And I think that's because in our country we just have kind of woven into the fabric of our nation the idea of individual liberty and free choice.
And the right to work bill that you support says no worker can be forced to join a union or forced to pay union dues, correct?
As a condition of employment, right.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to tax policy. In the letter from Mr. Bauer, WMC's goal is supporting eliminating the highest personal tax bracket, 7.65%. Thanks for helping me. But here's my question. The current budget, as you know, actually cut tax brackets, and the report this week from Lieutenant Governor Clayfish and Rick Chandler said that cutting those tax brackets saved taxpayers $750 million. So you don't think that's enough? WMC doesn't think it's enough?
Well, I think, first of all, we supported those tax cuts and think that's great. The problem is that we continue to be in the top 10 in the country in terms of the highest tax states in the nation. And when we look at that top bracket at 7.65%, which you might...
It was shaved a little bit from 7.75.
Right. But if you recall, that was the tax hike that Governor Doyle and the Democrat-controlled legislature passed in 2009 without even a public hearing. They did it in 48 hours, and the business community and everybody else never even had the opportunity to explain why this is a bad idea. And if we would have had that opportunity back then, we would have told legislators that 90% of businesses don't pay corporate taxes. They pay individual taxes because they're organized as a limited liability company,
as an LLC,
or an S corp, or a sole proprietorship or partnership.
Right.
And so that creating that high tax bracket and the excuse for doing so is, well, let's get the rich people and make them pay more. What that ended up doing is hitting small businesses actually harder than the targeted, so-called rich people. It isn't a tax on the rich; it's a tax on small and medium-sized businesses, which are really the foundational backbone of our economy. And that 7.65 rate is the 10th highest in the country. So our small businesses and our medium-sized businesses are paying the 10th highest tax rate in the United States. That just makes it harder for them to either start a new business or even stay in business.
Well, staying on taxes, because I'm sorry I'm a bit of a wonk on the issue. I'm just curious, why isn't WMC suggesting that maybe we ought to get rid of the corporate tax, which raised $999 million last year? Wouldn't abolishing the corporate tax help your members?
Well, I think it would help our members, but I think reducing the personal income tax would help the business community and individuals even more, and it's a lot less expensive to do so. I think it's around $200 or $250 million.
I think you're right.
Impact. So I think it's a lot more realistic tax cutting goal than eliminating the corporate income tax.
And now let's talk about transportation taxes. And let me frame it this way. Yesterday I was at a press conference with leaders of the Wisconsin counties, League of Municipalities, and the Wisconsin towns. And each one of them said, we support Secretary Mark Gottlieb's transportation budget for 2015-2017, which, let me get the numbers right, $700 million in higher taxes and fees and a $574 million diversion from the general fund. Does WMC support Secretary Gottlieb's budget?
Well, I think he gets a lot of credit for putting forward an earnest proposal. I think it was, from our perspective, some of the funding mechanisms we have concern with. I mean, as you know, Steve, it's about a 5 cent per gallon in gas tax increase on regular gas and about 10 cents on diesel.
Yes, sir.
That differential, there's very significant concern in the business community about that differential for a variety of reasons. Number one, we're a manufacturing state, and we rely, certainly not exclusively, but significantly on getting our goods to the marketplace through diesel trucking. And so a significant increase in the diesel tax makes manufacturing in our state more expensive, makes it harder for us to compete. But then we also have a lot of businesses in this state that are truck stops and convenience stores. And if we have this significant spike in diesel taxes, we're going to give over-the-road truckers an incentive to fill up in our neighboring states like Illinois and Iowa and Minnesota. And that's going to mean less commerce conducted in Wisconsin, and we call them truck stops because people stop there. They don't. It's not like you fill up your car and then go drive off. Truckers stop there. They get a meal. They make purchases. They might visit a hotel or a motel. I think we risk losing a lot of business there. So I think the business community recognizes that we've got challenges with transportation funding. Mm-hmm. I think the business community is willing to support funding increases, including a gas tax increase, which is something, frankly, we haven't been terribly supportive of the past. But we do recognize the need, and we recognize that our current funding structure is just inadequate. I mean, it's not giving us the resources we need to ensure that we have a safe and reliable infrastructure in our state.
The WMC letter this week said maybe we should also raise the $75 that you and I pay annually to register our vehicles. But I just got off the phone with the Fiscal Bureau. If you raise it from $75 to $85 a year, it raises $45.9 million a year, according to the Fiscal Bureau. And even Secretary Gottlieb's 5-cent increase in the gas tax, 10-cent increase in the diesel tax, according to the Fiscal Bureau, only raises $197 million. And you've heard Secretary Gottlieb say our shortfall is between $600 million and $700 million. So some of the tax increases that WMC is saying we might be able to support wouldn't solve a problem as big as Secretary Gottlieb paints it, correct?
Well, that's correct. And I think if you look at the registration fee as an example, it's $75 right now.
Hasn't been increased since 2008.
Right. It hasn't been increased in years. And when we look at other states, including our neighboring states, we are very low. And so a $10 increase, I think we could do more than $10 and still be a very affordable place to register a vehicle and still be less expensive than our neighbors, and in some cases significantly less expensive than our neighbors.
Well, I'm sorry, were you done?
The only thing I was going to add is that I think that there's a role also to supplement transportation funding with general fund dollars.
Okay. Do you like Secretary Gottlieb's number, 574?
I think the balance that you have to have on that is that we support tax reform and tax relief, be it income tax relief or property tax relief. So every dollar that we spend, that we take from the general fund and put in the transportation fund, is a dollar that we can't devote to tax relief in our state. So I think while we can be supportive of and have been supportive of transferring general fund dollars to backfill the transportation fund, we have to make sure that balance is there. And I'm not sure if that Secretary Gottlieb's number is the right balance.
Well, let's talk about the overall budget picture. You have Superintendent Evers asking for $613 million more for school aids. You have the Department of Health Services saying we need $760 million more to pay our MA caseloads. And then you have this transportation issue, and WMC supports a tax cut. How can all this, there's the projected $2.2 billion projected estimated deficit and balance. How should this all be resolved?
Well, let's first put it into perspective, because when we talk about a $2.2 billion shortfall, that's like saying that the Manley household has a December deficit of $250,000 because of that Ferrari on my Christmas list, which, by the way, I won't be getting. So I mean, we've got some pretty extensive wish lists out there from the state agencies, and that's what always happens. Republican or Democrat governor, agencies always ask for the sky and the moon, and they don't ultimately end up getting it. So I think that number is going to go down. But like any budget, whether we're talking about the family budget or we're talking about a business budget or the state budget, it's about setting priorities. And I think Governor Walker in this legislature has made clear that they've got very specific priorities that include cutting taxes. And so I think, I guess we'll find out when the governor releases his budget. We'll have a better idea of what the numbers actually look like, and what kind of tax relief we're able to do. But Governor Walker has been pretty unequivocal that his budget is going to reduce taxes, and that when he's done with his second term, taxes on Wisconsin families will be lower than when he took office. So that's a good sign from our perspective.
Let's talk about some other items on the WMC priority list. Let's talk about frac sand mining. Is WMC going to propose a preemption law that would set statewide standards for frac sand mines? And the other side of that would be prohibiting local governments from setting tougher standards?
No, well, let's make sure that we understand what we're talking about. If you're talking about environmental standards, currently, and case law is pretty clear on this, the legislature has given sole authority to the Department of Natural Resources to set and administer air quality standards and water quality standards. The doctrine of field preemption is already there. It preempts. Now, it preempts local governments from enacting their own. Unfortunately, that hasn't stopped them. And so we can either have this situation where we have now, where you end up litigating on a town by town, county by county, village by village basis, or you can just make it crystal clear, as we're going to ask the legislature to do, that the Department of Natural Resources occupies the field here. They're the ones that set state and statewide water quality standards, statewide air quality standards. That isn't a new concept. It would just be codifying existing law. Now, as it relates, that isn't to say that local governments shouldn't play a role in regulating. I think they should. And what we've said, and our organization has never said local government should be preempted from regulating sand mines. Quite the contrary, we believe they should be, and they should be able to make decisions about whether or not sand mining is the right fit for their community. All we're saying is make those decisions the way we've been doing it for over 100 years in this state, which is through land use planning and zoning. So we have, as we currently have, communities all across the state where they have said, we're going to zone this area for residential, we're going to zone this area for commercial, and if we see fit, we'll zone this area as being suitable for non-metallic mining. I mean, that's all we're saying. We want people who come to Wisconsin, want to make an investment in sand mining and creating jobs, to have a very clear understanding of what the local expectations are and what kinds of business they want to welcome to their communities. And we think zoning is the way to go about doing that.
Okay, while we're talking about mining, it's almost 2 years since we changed the mining laws for Giebig to Seek, that open pit iron mine in Ashland, Iron County. 2 years later, do you think, do you still expect that mine to open, and if so, when?
Well, it's tough to predict. I mean, we're very hopeful that it will, but we've got a rigorous permitting process. I mean, for all of the hand-wringing and gnashing of teeth that went on surrounding that bill, and we had legislators, I think cynically saying, we've just given this company a free pass to come mine. Well, here we are 2 years later, the data collection process to even put a permit together isn't even done yet.
Yeah, it's still.
And so they continue to collect data, both water quality data, surface water quality, groundwater quality, geology data. All of this goes into the scientific analysis that is the permit request. And then once they give that to the DNR, it's going to take them time, as well as federal regulators, to make the determination of whether or not that plan actually satisfies our state water quality and groundwater quality and air quality standards.
So 2 years later, are you more worried that the mine may not open?
Well, I don't know that I'm worried. We remain hopeful. We hope that, I mean, what I think we tried to do in Wisconsin is say, we recognize we've got a problem that in our mining law that's a barrier to investment. We're going to try and remove those obstacles if we can, and do so in a way that's still protective of the environment and requires a very rigorous environmental analysis before we give you a permit. And that process is ongoing, and I think we just need to let the process work. What we found disheartening is some politicians last fall who said, if elected, I'm going to make sure that we don't have this mine opening up. We don't think that's fair. I mean, we think that anybody who wants to come here and make an investment in mining jobs should at least be able to make the case on a scientific basis that they can do mining here safely. And I think it really sends the wrong message to people who would come here and seek to invest, to have politicians saying, we're going to look at this through a political lens, not through a scientific and environmental lens.
Okay, 2 more questions on policy before we talk some politics. The WMC letter says, what's wrong with our state's workers' compensation system, Scott?
Well, we have a situation in our state where our medical costs under the workers' compensation program have been growing significantly faster than medical inflation, medical CPI. And so what that means is, if you go in for common workers' compensation procedures like a knee replacement or shoulder surgery, lower back surgery, carpal tunnel, you end up paying significantly more than what you would pay for the exact same procedure under a group health insurance policy, and perhaps as important, significantly more than what you'd pay in another state. In fact, for some of these procedures, not all by any means, but for some of them, including some of the common ones, it costs 2 to 3 times as much for that medical procedure in Wisconsin than it does elsewhere. And that ultimately becomes a business competitiveness issue for Wisconsin businesses. And so we look at the workers' compensation system and thinking about reforms that would be appropriate. One of them, we want to find a way to contain medical costs.
Okay.
We want to do it in a fair way and in a way that makes sense for Wisconsin, but we absolutely believe that medical cost containment has to be part of the legislative agenda on work comp.
When you talk about medical costs, there's a reference in Mr. Bauer's letter to wrong-headed federal policies. Is that a reference to the Affordable Care Act, Scott?
Absolutely.
Well, how have Wisconsin businesses reacted to the ACA, and what decisions will it force them to make in the future?
Well, we survey our members twice a year on a whole variety of issues, including health care costs. I mean, our organization has long believed that the best way to ensure that we have people covered in our state is that we have a robust employer-sponsored health insurance system. What we found with the Affordable Care Act, and keep in mind it hasn't even been fully implemented yet. We actually haven't even seen the employer mandate yet, which I think is really...
That was delayed.
That was
executive order.
Correct, and I think that's really going to be where when we feel the hurt in the business place, and all of these employees who have insurance through their employers are going to really see the hit. What we're already seeing, even without the employer mandate, from our members, based on their survey results, is that they're seeing premiums go up by double digits. We're seeing businesses who are forced to make wage decisions based on their healthcare costs.
Okay.
And that's a bad outcome for employees, because not only do they end up having to pay more as a copay, but money that businesses contribute to the employer portion of the health insurance is now eating up wages, and that's a bad thing, and unfortunately something that we fear is only going to get worse as the Affordable Care Act is further implemented.
One more question before we get into some politics. I have a few political questions. Does WMC support the governor's plan to drug test those who are receiving public benefits?
Yes, and I think this is an issue that we hear very frequently, and unfortunately increasingly from our members, is that they've got a lot of jobs that they can fill in the manufacturing sector, in the healthcare sector, in many sectors of our economy. They are increasingly finding it difficult to get qualified applicants that can pass a drug test. And when we talk about manufacturers as a great example, mm-hmm. I mean, you're working in a situation where you've got heavy equipment and machinery, and you can really have a bad outcome if you've got somebody who's operating that kind of equipment while they're impaired. And so for employers, it's critical for the safety of their workforce to make sure that they've got people who don't have a drug or alcohol abuse problem. And I mean, they're struggling. I mean, they're finding people who have the skill set that they would otherwise hire, but they're afraid to take on the liability because they can't pass a drug test. We need work-ready employees, and part of being work-ready is being sober.
We've only got a few minutes left, but let's talk politics. Is WMC comfortable with the rulings by judges that have removed the limits on how much people can give? That's the first question. And number two, does WMC support the the result of the judicial rulings that say companies should be able to contribute?
Well, first, to your first question, the contribution limits. Look, the legislature enacted those in the 70s, and they haven't been adjusted since then. So taking, for example, the $1,000 limit to a senator. If you look at inflation, that's probably $4,000 today in today's dollars. So I think it makes sense to increase those for no other reason than that they just haven't kept up with inflation.
Should there be any limits on it?
I think there probably should. I mean, I think it's reasonable to place limitations. I mean, part of me says, look, we should just have a system where, if somebody wants to give $8,000 to a senator, they should be allowed to do that, but it has to be disclosed so people know, and let's let voters make up their own mind. But I think that's not probably realistic politically. As it relates to your other question, WMC has always been a strong advocate for corporate free speech. And I think you probably remember in the late 90s when we went all the way to the Wisconsin Supreme Court,
yes,
and they validated our right to corporate free speech. And we think that in our society, it would be a bad thing if businesses weren't able to speak out and talk about issues that are important to their businesses with the government. And so we absolutely have and absolutely will into the future support corporate free speech.
Two more questions on politics. The first one is, does WMC agree with Speaker Voss that GAB needs to be reformed?
Well, I think, and we're regulated by the GAB too, and I think when you look at what the Wisconsin Supreme Court has said about our campaign finance laws and their administration, and what the Seventh Circuit of the U.S. Court of Appeals said earlier this year about our campaign finance laws and their administration, they said it's a mess and it needs to be fixed. We completely agree with that. And keep in mind, we are an organization that in 1996 were exercising our constitutionally affirmed right to free speech, and the successor or the predecessor organization, the Elections Board, took our ads off the air. They didn't chill our speech; they removed it, and we fought back. And the Wisconsin Supreme Court affirmed that they made the wrong call, that they actually infringed on our constitutional rights. So I think from our perspective, these are issues we take very, very seriously, because it really gets to our ability to petition our government.
And then the final question on politics. In the WMC filed a report with the GAB on its conduit spending. And it reported spending $44,870 to elect Republicans, ranging from Governor Walker to Assembly candidates. Didn't any pro-business Democrats run last year, Scott?
Well, we make our decisions on who we recommend, and of course our conduit is our members, and so they make their own decision about where. I don't decide where that money goes. Okay. They do.
One member writes a check,
right,
and
they have to approve who it goes to. I mean, they make the call. But we support legislators that are pro-business, regardless of their party affiliation. And in the past, we have supported pro-business Democrats. The problem is that, and we have a very objective scorecard that we use, where we score votes on issues that are of significant import to the business community. And if you get 70% or better on that scorecard, we're going to support you. But we did not have a single Democrat in either house of the legislature reach that level. And for candidates who aren't incumbents but who are seeking office, we send every single candidate of every political party a candidate survey, and we're very clear that we use these answers to make decisions about whether or not we would recommend that our members support you financially. And I don't think we had a single Democrat even return our survey.
Oh, I see.
So it's a little bit difficult to make the case for supporting candidates who won't even bother to fill out your survey and won't tell you where they stand on the issues that you think are important.
And I can't stop myself from asking one more political question. Governor Walker has said he thinks he should be listed as a serious candidate for president. Does WMC think he should run for president?
Well, you know, he's been a great governor. I think from our perspective, he's been the most pro-jobs, pro-growth governor that perhaps we've ever had, certainly in a generation. So for selfish reasons, we'd love to see him stay. But one of the things that Governor Walker says, and I think this is important, is that he likes to say that Republicans, need to tell the voters that the R behind their name stands for reform, and he has been a reform governor, and at a level that I think makes him competitive with anyone from any governor in any state. So I think I think it's very reasonable for Governor Walker to say, I deserve to be considered as a legitimate contender. Absolutely. No question.
The final question, I want to ask you about a phrase in Mr. Bauer's letter talking about WMC priorities. Wisconsin should not take our foot off the reform accelerator in order to improve Wisconsin's business climate. Put that in context as a final comment, sir.
Well, as I said before, we've made a lot of progress. I mean, when you look at our business rankings and our competitiveness rankings and the perception that we have, not only in this state, but throughout the entire country, we're making huge improvements. But from our perspective, our mission statement is we'll make Wisconsin the most competitive state in the nation to do business. We've made great strides, but we're not there yet. There's still a lot to do on the tax issue, as we talked about, and of course, right to work is a huge priority as well.
You've got a pretty ambitious agenda for the lawmakers that convene January 5, don't you?
We do.
Scott Manley, Vice President of Government Relations for Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce. Thanks for talking to Wisconsin Eye.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.